Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Mid Sussex District Council Cabinet on the 13th of September. I'm Councillor Jonathan Ash-Edwards, the leader of the Council. Before we start the meeting, I'll ask members of the Cabinet to confirm their presence. For those members of the public watching, with videos turned on, we have members of the Cabinet and members of the Council senior management team, and those with videos turned off are Democratic Services officers who are supporting this meeting, or other observing councillors or officers. So I'll start with the roll call, and if I can invite members when I call their name to confirm that they are indeed present. So I'll start with Councillor Llewellyn-Burke, the Deputy Leader.
Present.
Councillor Belsey.
Present.
Councillor Demir.
Present.
Councillor Hillier.
Present.
Councillor Salisbury.
Present.
And Councillor Webster.
Present.
Thank you very much. And I will now turn to Tom Clark, the Solicitor of the Council, for the virtual meeting explanation.
Thank you, Leader. We're meeting in accordance with the Local Authorities Executive Arrangement, Meetings and Access to Information Regulation of 2012, that allow the Executive to meet virtually. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Item 2 on the agenda is to receive any declarations of interest from members in respect of any matter on the agenda. Are there any declarations to make, please, colleagues? No declarations being made. So we'll move on to item 3 to receive apologies for absence. All members of the Cabinet are present, but I think we've got apologies from the Assistant Chief Executive, which we can note. Item 4 is to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting of Cabinet that was held on the 26th of July. Copies of those minutes are in our packs. If I could ask members using the voting buttons which can be found on Zoom under reactions to confirm yes or no whether we agree those minutes as an accurate record of that meeting, please. And that looks unanimous to me, so those minutes are agreed as the record of that meeting from 26th of July. Thank you. Item 5 is to consider any items the leader agrees to take as urgent business. I'm not aware that we have any. So we'll go to item 6, the budget management report, progress report from April to July 2021. And I'll turn to Peter Stewart, the Head of Corporate Resources, to introduce this.
Thank you, Chairman. The report follows the usual format. Of course, it's from April to July 21, the new financial year. And there's an important update. The figures before you, of course, show that there'll be they show a forecast overspend of some £277,000 by year end. But the paragraph 3 in the summary also mentions that we were awaiting the MHCLG income compensation scheme detailed outline, so that we could actually calculate what we felt the income compensation would be for the first 3 months of this financial year. That came through, I think, on Friday, eagerly anticipated, you'll appreciate, by the sector. And our initial calculations show that, if you remember, there's a 5% baseline and to be deducted from any compensation. It's only for 3 months of the year, and it only covers 75% of that income that's left after the 5% deduction. But to get to the point, we think it's some £386,000 that we will be due. I must say these are initial figures only. They're not subject to audit, etc. But that would tip us, quite importantly, into an underspent position than an overspent position by some £100,000. I would offer a large caveat to these figures. This is a forecast overspend only. There's much that can happen, of course, over the rest of the financial year, not least any financial consequences of any further locking down of the economy for whatever reason. I haven't got any inside information on that, but I just mentioned that simply as a caveat to the figures. These are initial indications. It's I know it's only halfway through the year now. However, that is a better picture portrayed now than was in this paper for this year. I dare say we'll come on to further future years elsewhere in the agenda. Members will note that both car parking and development management are still showing, whilst there are some variances, we are forecasting a projected income of 30% and 20% less than we were pre-pandemic. That shows no quick signs of recovery, I have to say, right now. So it's likely that will manifest as pressures not only this year, probably next year, and so on, unless something radical changes. Again, there's the papers on your agenda today do run on into each other, really, so that things I say in this part of the agenda, probably I'll repeat myself a little bit later. But overall, this gives a picture of 100,000 underspent right now. Not too bad, could be a lot worse, but I'll save anything else I have to say for the next item on the agenda. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Stewart. I'll turn first to the Deputy and Portfolio Holder, Councillor Wellenberg.
Thank you, Chairman. My first question was going to be whether we'd had any update on the MHCLG income compensation scheme. So I'm delighted to hear that we have news and a projection of what we're going to get. So excellent news. It's a difficult report, isn't it? Because we do have the bad news, but we don't know when it's going to end, and we don't know to what extent it's going to be. So with the leisure centres and the town centre rental income, I mean, all of those are affected by the pandemic. And as Mr. Stewart said, they'll be going into next year. But I haven't got any specific questions to ask, because I don't think that we have the answers about the forward projections and what they could be like. We could be discussing it the next 24 hours. But I just wanted to comment that I'm very pleased that the capital, that we're able to proceed with the capital grants that we want to, and that we're able to transfer funds to these specific reserves. For example, Gatwick Airport, I don't know what my colleagues' parish and town council meetings are like, but that's at the top of the agenda for many people. So I'm very pleased that we're able to put money into reserves and also continue on our greatest strategic projects that we have that are necessary for the prosperity or continuing prosperity of this part of Sussex. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wellenberg. Councillor De Mere.
Thank you. And yes, Mr. Stewart, thank you very much indeed for that updated information, which is good news. It answers the question that I did have on that, which was the timescale of the income compensation scheme. It's just one, and it's probably because of my ignorance. We talk about the income from the leisure centres, which I believe we will need to continue all the time. The COVID laws are in operation. On that basis, are we anticipating any more claims to be made under the income compensation scheme for that? And if we aren't, when do you think that we could be looking for the continuation of a management fee from the leisure centres? As I say, it could be my ignorance, but please put me at my...
Okay, I think, Chairman, shall I answer that? Because the income compensation scheme is, without stating the obvious, is actually just for the lost income. So £1.4 million of lost income, it will compensate us for that, but only for the first 3 months of this financial year. After that, we are on our own. And I understand that any further there are no further discussions going on between the departments responsible for culture and leisure and Treasury. I think they've come to the end of their support, if you like, for the leisure industry, that's what I understand. Of course, we are in this financial year, 21-22, we are still supporting leisure business with some of their costs, their costs that they hadn't foreseen. We are supporting them with that. And that does not form part of the income compensation, because it's not income, it's a cost that we're having to, it's an expenditure we're having to incur to support them through this difficult time. We are, of course, hopeful that soon we will get to a position where the contractor can pay us the contracted sum. We're not there yet, as the next paper mentions. Those discussions need to happen throughout the rest of the financial year. But if you like, our bottom line is we have a contract in place, and we would like to see that honoured. Now we need to work out to make sure that by doing that, we're not cutting our nose off to spoil our face. But it's still a contractual position that we need to get back to, because as you'll see from the papers, the next item at least, it is quite a central part of our income, and we'd like to see that business thrive again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members wishing to speak? Okay, Councillor Gust.
Thank you, Chairman. I was only just I was going to comment on the leisure centre position as well. As Councillor Demis already said, though, you know, we're not yet in the position to be able to show contract scheme income from the leisure centres, but it is very good news that our leisure centres are open again. Lots of classes are taking place. You know, we believe that there are good and growing attendances at the classes, and that many people are enjoying those centres for their physical and mental health, which has been very important after the 18 months that we've been going through. So I was just going to provide some reassurance. I know officers and members are monitoring very carefully the position on this, and as you've already heard from Mr. Stewart, they're in regular dialogue with Places Leisure, something to follow up over the next few months. And I know that we will all hope that the performance of those centres continues to improve over forthcoming months, and hopefully that will result in an improving financial position as well as attendances continue to grow. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Councillor Bass. That's something we're all keen to see. So I endorse your comments. I haven't got any other members indicating they wish to speak, so we'll turn to the recommendations that are set out in paragraph 4 of the paper, little one down to class 6. I won't read them all out, but they're all set out on page 7 of the hard copy papers. If I can ask members to use the voting buttons under reactions to vote on those recommendations, please. And those are to recommend those items to council for approval. And that is a unanimous vote in favour, so those recommendations are agreed. Thank you very much. We'll turn now to item 7, Service and Financial Planning Guidelines for 2022-23, and back to Peter Stewart, Head of Corporate Resources for this one as well.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Again, whilst this report does follow the usual format, it doesn't have the usual contents, and as you'll read through that, you'll see why. It is usually at this time of year we put together a report that sets out the service and financial planning guidelines for the next year. So in this case, it'd be 22-23, and generally speaking, you wouldn't say one year is quite like another. It's never quite the same, but there hasn't usually been that level of turmoil in both the local government sector and the wider economic situation to cause us any great concern. There's usually been, in the past, 10 years ago, we were putting a report together that said we needed to make savings over the medium term, but they certainly were not of the order we have in front of us today. So the purpose of the paper today is not only to set out next year's task, which I have to say is less challenging than the year after. The 23-24 year and thereafter are really the years where I would like members to think about over the next year or so. So the paper sets out lots of factors that will affect our ability to set a balanced budget over the medium term. And as the papers do quite clear, next year, to put it reasonably clearly, is not too bad. Next year is not too bad. It's a year not unlike this year. The government, I think, has said it doesn't want to pull the rug from under the feet of local government, especially at a time of a pandemic. So they're going to do what they can to try and make next year reasonably like this year. So kind of tough, but not as bad as it's going to get. And that's not by design. It's by coincidence, unfortunately, that many things come together. So the paper starts by setting out where we were, and we were thinking that we have to have a deficit of some £3 million from General Reserve in next year. That's on paragraph 16. Now, we don't think that's going to happen. It's not going to happen for two reasons. We don't think there'll be a business rates reset. And when I say I don't think, this does mean this. I have no concrete evidence either way, I'm afraid. But the indications are from the government that there will be no business rates reset for next year to affect things, and there'll be no fair funding review that takes effect in next year either. The unfortunate thing is that they haven't just shelved those; they've just put them back a year. So that our effect will be that next year we think will be a sort of standstill kind of year, and all the changes come in after that. And I think the paper makes that fairly clear. We are still forecasting really, that income will be down in 22-23 and probably down in 23-24 and onwards. And that's income pretty much across the board. There are some areas where that doesn't really seem to occur. One, for example, is green waste. That seems to be a very strong market. With a very reasonably priced service, obviously very popular, and we think that income stream carries on. It's certainly weathered the pandemic so far. But other areas where you have people, say, parking or spending money on other things like, let's say, development management, we are finding that the income streams are suffering. As I said earlier, parking is some 30% down, which is quite a lot of money, and development management is 20% down. These are significant sums, and you still don't know what's going to happen. We aren't certain about what's going to happen with the leisure income either. So once you start factoring these reductions in the income in, with a cost base which is relatively stable, and as you'll see is actually slightly increasing because of pay awards, you start to see this imbalance creeping in a little bit in next year, but certainly the lines between income and expenditure start to diverge in 23-24 onwards, especially because of the business rates reset. Now, we don't know what's going to happen there. All we know is there will be a reset, and money from areas that have had growth, like us, will be redistributed to areas that have greater need but less growth. And that obviously is an issue for us. So I won't go through every detail here. There is a little bit of good news, although it's not official, which is that new homes bonus, it sounds like, referring to not taking the rug from under our feet, it sounds like new homes bonus scheme will carry on for one more year. So we'll have a legacy payment and the full payment as well from increasing our tax base. Again, that's not official policy. That's just something that's been mentioned by somebody. I can't mention myself. But it sounds like that will be a way forward for next year, which is some good news. I'm afraid that's probably the only piece of good news I have in here, though, because there's increasingly less good news. We don't know yet what will happen to pensions, both our own pensions and the pensions for the people in the places leisure part of the scheme. Because if whilst we are in deficit and can spread our deficit over 20 years, it's entirely possible that places leisure will get asked to improve their deficits, if they have one, over a shorter period, which increases their costs. An increase in their costs is usually not a good thing for us. It might increase our costs over that term as well. Again, we don't know that. A more recent announcement around the cost of care and the government's increase of NI on care will affect us, because it affects employers' contributions and national insurance. Now, if employers' contributions and national insurance are going up, let's say on the waste contract or any contract, it's probably quite likely that the contractor will, because it's a change in law, will try and move those costs of increases back to us again as the ultimate client. So we'll need to do some work with our many contractors around that. Yes, and the last thing to say, I think, really around, to go back to business rates just temporarily, is there does seem to be an ever increasing cacophony, if you like, of people talking about business rates and how unfair the whole regime is. So it's not impossible that we see a completely, I wouldn't say a completely new way of taxing businesses, but maybe a hybrid may come forward. And again, you know, our business rates has grown tremendously in the last few years, and we are in danger, I have to tell you, of losing most or some of that growth to other areas. So it's something we can lobby for, lobby against, I should say, but I think it is a real danger that will affect our bottom line. So where we get to is appendices 1 and 2, which show the level of support that we think, everything has been equal, the level of support we'll need to put in from the General Reserve towards the imbalance between income and expenditure. Those are significant figures. Now, Appendix 2 contains the figures with quotes damping. Now, opinion is divided, I have to tell you, between consultants on whether damping will happen or not. Some, you know, consultant A says yes, they surely can't bring in such big cuts without some level of damping. A consultant B might say, well, there's no evidence for that. So as I sit here today, I just don't know. We just don't know as a sector. And even if we did know if that damping was coming in, we wouldn't know the extent to which damping would come in. Now, so these are quite important figures. So in my mind, at least, I'm in Appendix 1, I'm afraid, which is no damping until it's been proven that we have damping. And that means that we'll be, whilst next year, 22-23, doesn't look too bad, we are still supporting, and we will support the revenue account with General Reserve. It could have been worse, but then it gets worse after that. So I think if I was to try and sum this up in one paragraph, I'd say next year is the year in which we need to do some work around our medium-term financial plan. Next year is a really important year. You could say we've bought ourselves, the government's bought us a year to sort ourselves out, but we must prepare for 23-24, which on the current indications looks to be a very difficult year indeed. And that looks to set off a number of very bad years in the future. So I think we have a 18-month window in which to address these issues. I'm sorry to be a bearer of such a downbeat report, but I'm afraid the evidence does rather suggest that things are going to get very tough. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is Joe for that very cheery report, but important nonetheless. And, you know, some important issues raised there. I think we know the challenges ahead, and of course, yeah, as things, you know, sort of reopening now following the worst of the pandemic, you know, also remains to be seen a little bit kind of what level of bounce back there might be, and what more sort of structural damage may have been done, and we'll have to navigate our way through over the service planning process in the autumn, through making sure we put this council in as strong a financial position as we can, while also delivering services and facilities that our communities want. And so we've managed our way through that challenge in the past, and it feels like we've sort of gone back quite a few years to the last recession, and we were able to do that then, and so we'll need to do that again. I'm confident that we will be able to work together and do that. And of course, you know, the issues we face are not unique at all, and many other councils and neighbours grappling with exactly the same issues that we are. I'll start with Councillor Webster.
Chairman, I did find Mr. Stewart's report very interesting. and I particularly liked the graphic representation of the sources of our finance on page 25. The pie chart I thought was very helpful. And what struck me particularly was the council tax share only represents 35% of our income, which is probably a surprise to many council taxpayers. And then government income to the council is slightly less percentage-wise than our council tax percentage. And I suppose that's one of the effects of us having diversified our income streams over the years. And we've worked very hard, actually, as a council over the last 10 years or so, since the last recession, after the financial crash, which we entered with our finances not being in a particularly strong state. They are now in a significantly stronger state. We have worked hard to build up those reserves. But unfortunately, I'm picking up from Mr. Stewart that it's a bit of a movable feast. Talking about pie charts and movable feasts. And I think we obviously need to be very careful going forward that we remain pragmatic and careful, and we concentrate on delivering our statutory responsibilities, which we've done very well over the last year or 18 months. But we also need to maintain a degree of flexibility and fleet of footness in order to capitalize on any opportunities as they come forward, because I'm sure there will be opportunities coming forward for us to deliver for our residents as we currently do and as we always have done. So that's really, I suppose, my message is that we need to watch carefully and be ready to respond quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webster. Councillor Hillier.
Thank you, Chairman. As per Councillor Webster, thank goodness this council's been prudent and innovative with its finances over recent years. I dread to think what we could be facing. So just not to add to the gloom, but I know it's an area of uncertainty. One of the items that you mentioned, Peter, was in relation to garden waste, and that's a fairly significant income for us. We're aware that government is looking at the whole matter of waste. And I've heard rumours, and I think we've probably had ad hoc conversations, and one of the things that may happen is that councils will be forced to do free garden waste collections, etc. I don't know if that's realistic or if we have any timing, or whether that, again, bit of bad news is potentially factored in, or it's just hopefully unlikely. I don't know if anybody's got a comment to make to help with that. Thank you.
Stuart.
Well, I can't add anything much. We are aware that has been mooted. But all I can say to that is that for us, that's a successful line of income, earning £1.6 million a year. And we certainly would not want to see that reduced or driven to zero through some kind of policy, central government policy change.
Thank you. Councillor DeMille.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Peter. I'm assuming you're in rehearsal for Father Christmas, are you, for the pantomime at the end of the year? But well done you for making this so clear. And yes, thank goodness we had some reserves and have been prudent over many years, because otherwise we'll be in the same state as others are. I had just one question, which is paragraph 32, where you tell us that our consultants anticipate a 12% reduction in our overall funding. This is the fair funding review. Is that, which slice of the pie chart will that come off, if you see what I mean? 12% because we work very hard to make our assets work. So I just wondered which bit of the pie chart that 12% reduction might come off. Council tax.
I mean, thank you, Chairman. The only levers actually that the government can pull now for us, and this doesn't apply to all authorities, is in the area of business rates. That would be the prime candidate for the reduction, and also, of course, other government grants and contributions. Like we do have grants from the DWP and other agencies that all add up. And I think the statement was meant to indicate that it was trying to summarise a quite complicated position about whether all the money comes in by taking the settlement funding assessment, which I didn't want to put in here really, and saying actually it looks like a 12% reduction in 23-24. And a quick comment actually about our reserves. You're quite right, Councillor Demir. We are very fortunate in having a good level of reserves. That is a double-edged sword, of course, though, because I have to say, and I'm not here to lecture you on this, but if you do have reserves, it is, of course, a lot easier to spend them than if you don't. And of course, in the longer term, as we all know, this is not sustainable. Thank you.
Councillor Wellenberg.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Mrs. Stewart a question, because this plan really shows what happens when you can diversify and you can become financially independent and try and do all the safeguards you can until basically an act of God. The pandemic has just changed everything for us, and we have no idea about what's going to happen. But I was very interested, and now's probably not the time to discuss it, but in this whole theory of damping, I thought it sounded like a wonderful idea and gave us a bit of a soft landing. And I wondered if you would have any idea if it was going to happen, when we would know.
If only I did know, Chairman. Yes, I don't know. We don't know. We know that when the spending review is now, but we don't know what's going to be in it. And we don't know. I mean, I think probably I'll hazard a guess and say this time next year. If only because the government does have, and it's no criticism intended particularly, but the government does have a habit of giving us this sort of news at the last minute and thinking that we can just recover from it over the next through the service planning round for 4 months, let's say. So in the past, we've had bad news through provisional settlements as late as December, ready for a March or April budget the following year. So the track record is not great on giving us advance warning of these things, I'm afraid.
Thank you. So as Councillor Webster said, we've got to be nimble, which we usually are.
We have to display fleet of footness, I think he said. Mm.
Thank you. Councillor Balsing.
Thank you, Chairman. Just sort of picking up on something you said about other councils being in a similar position, and also something else that Mrs. Stewart said, where he sort of indicated that having reserves can be a double-edged sword, which slightly surprised me, because I'm sure he would rather be chief financial officer of a council that had reserves than a council that didn't. And it did make me wonder if maybe through his network of other finance officers, what sorts of situations are being faced by other councils, what those councils which don't have reserves are doing in this situation, and whether other councils are being affected in terms of the services that we are still able to plan on delivering. And so I'd be quite grateful for his perspective as regards other councils and their positions. Thank you.
Well, Chairman, it's a little bit too early to say, Councillor Belsey, I'm afraid. I mean, generally, where other authorities haven't got reserves and are in danger of effectively going bust, they can seek capitalisation directions from the Secretary of State, such that they can sell an asset, whatever it might be, and use that money to support their revenue budget, which ordinarily wouldn't be possible. I think when you get to that sort of position, things have gone a little bit awry. And you're quite right. It is nicer to be a CFO of a authority with reserves than one without, of course. But I was simply making a rather crude statement, I suppose, that reserves are hard fought and sometimes easily spent.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I don't have any other members who've indicated that they wish to speak, so I'll turn to the recommendations. Then paragraph 9, little 1 and little 2 over the page, and I'll ask members to indicate via the voting buttons whether those recommendations are agreed, please. And those recommendations are agreed unanimously. That brings us to the end then of this cabinet meeting. So I'll close the meeting at 4:35 p.m. and thank everyone very much for their attendance.
Thank you, members.